Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Debra Brackeen, Chief Innovation Officer of CSAA Insurance. Debra, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Thank you, Nicola. I'm very excited to be here with you today. I would say that a lot of it goes back personally to my father, which I never would have admitted in my younger years. My father was an aerospace engineer and he worked for Martin Marietta. He became an executive, and in a very stodgy, old staid industry, he was very entrepreneurial, and he ended up working on and leading many programs for Martin that are, I guess you could put them in the experimental category. So that inspired me, even though I didn't realize it at the time, to be thinking big, thinking beyond, and just really, as I did enter the workforce and we had conversations once I became a young professional, it just really has inspired me, and still to this day it does. He's been gone a long time, but it really does inspire me. I've always been drawn to the next new kind of cool thing. I actually had the opportunity to start working at Apple when I was still at Stanford, and that turned into a 10-year career at Apple. And Apple at the time was nowhere near as dominant as they are now. They were like the David to IBM's Goliath. It was very entrepreneurial. It really supported, let's say, nonconformist type of thinking. I think in the early days, you didn't even have to have an engineering degree to be hired as a programmer there. It's just very grassroots. But the last 2 years that I worked there, I had the opportunity to be in the Newton division. And for anyone old enough to remember, Newton was an original personal digital assistant. The first 15, 20 years of my career were in high tech. And I only recently shifted over in the last 10 plus years to financial services, first at Citi Ventures, and then more recently, last 5 years at CSAA. I feel lucky in the last 15 years, starting at HP, then Citi, and now at CSAA, that I've been able to make a career out of really specializing in corporate innovation and venture. But I think it was those seeds of entrepreneurial spirit and thinking that I was exposed to early on that landed me where I am.
I think one word you've said a lot, which I think matters so much, is inspiration. And I think we will touch on that. Could you tell me one of the big takeaway you had from HP and big takeaway you had from Citi that you brought into your current role?
Yeah. I think at HP, that's where I learned that I needed to have that backbone, that fortitude, that ability to stand in the face of a senior executive. What I really learned from HP was to trust myself and my instincts about when to proceed with something, even when others were telling me not to do it. The practices and the mindset around lean startup, minimum viable product, and test and learn, and more iterative approach, which to me, it's very analogous to venture stage investing, right? You're stage gating things, and it's the way that you can get to this next key milestone. The discipline of that.
I won't double click on Lean Startup because I'm passionate about it and I've deployed it in my previous organization. So it would take 1 hour. But let me double click on the HP executive, but not that example, but more the need for championship or not making investments. Because sometimes it could be very valuable to have championship because then you can actually support the entrepreneur and add value. But sometimes it could mean that it's filter, a restriction, a bias. How did you think about this championship of different business groups, business units, executives when you want to make an investment?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's a really big issue. I think in fact, one of my former team members from HP is leading venture investing at HP PC printer company today. And we've talked about this quite a bit. When you're in a situation where you require a business unit leader to effectively sponsor, sign off, approve, whatever word you want to use, but if they have any authority over that process, I just personally think that's a real hindrance to many things. It's a hindrance to your literal investment process. It's probably a factor for what talent's going to be willing to join your investment team. I think venture investors as a category are pretty independent, autonomous minded people. So I was lucky to have two board members at CSA who were part of my interview process. One is a Silicon Valley veteran and mainstay, and the other is an entrepreneur, happens to be out of Utah. But they've been our venture advisors since we got approval for Avanta Ventures in my first year. And I aligned with one of those, the Silicon Valley veteran, very early on. I think before I really started developing the proposal that I had to pitch to the board to get the first fund approved. And it was that we cannot have BU approval. Now, we consider ourselves strategic investors. We have professional investors running Avanta. So they know, and if you ask them, they'd say, of course, we're trying to produce a financial return, which I appreciate because then you're going to make a good investment. If you
Yeah,
invest in a company because it's cool and it's not a good financial investment, you're not going to get any strategic value out of it anyway.
exactly.
I think you got a big part of my role is that I don't know what the right word is. I'm the liaison, I'm running interference, I'm creating the conditions and protecting, if you will, our venture arm from too much stupid stuff from the bureaucracy or the mothership. But I'm also influencing them and coaching them. You can't be completely like running around like a crazy team over there and maintain the support of the parent company. So finding the governance and this that everybody can get comfortable with, I think is really important. And that's probably been one of my biggest areas of focus the last 5 years with Avanta is just the right governance and structure and processes that allow them to do what they are great at. And that our board, because we report to every quarter, we give an Avanta update to the F&I committee of our board. We just did it earlier this week. And my CEO and partners on the investment committee from the firm. That's just crucial that you have that set up right and structured well. But yeah, I believe part of a really important thing, if there was a tip for your audience, I think it's better if you can get a policy and a governance process that allows the investment team to invest within those agreed parameters without BU approval. But you also have to, venture team and I also invest in what are the other things we need to be doing so that when we take one of our portfolio companies to a business unit, that they are open to partner with them because that's why we're investing is to create commercial value mutually with our portfolio companies for the benefit of our customers.
And this is beyond governance. This is actually probably about building trust, building goodwill, and also showing that you're bringing strategic value. And in our previous conversation, you talked about some of your publications that you have that is shared internally. I feel like this is one step towards building trust and understanding of the strategic value. Could you share with the audience a little of your tips, what you've learned about what you're publishing internally?
Yeah, that was probably the hardest part, by the way, of getting approval. Even though I pre-sold it in my interview process and joining CSAA, I started in November of 2016. And I tagged in my mind, I want to make my proposal for the venture arm on the June board meeting the next year. And if I don't get it quite right and they send me back to do more homework, I'll do it again in the September board meeting. But we were lucky to get approval on the first board meeting. But part of the pitch process to the board, which was not an easy sell, was why are we doing this? We're doing for the strategic insights and learnings that will inform our strategy and influence our strategy as we think about how the world. So it's a channel to bring the outside in and make it meaningful for the board and for my colleagues. And then ultimately the commercial value that you're hopeful to achieve with your portfolio companies, if you can. There's a lot of strategic exhaust that comes out of that process of meeting all those companies. The investors are forming opinions about, I'm going to make an investment in this area. I'm just trying to figure out the right one. So being able to really distill and synthesize, that's the best phrase I can come up with, insights in a way that's relevant for our board and my peers on the executive leadership team and our senior leaders. You got to have good writing talent, by the way, we've learned, and thankfully our Avanta team does. But we've published now, I think, for over 3.5 years, every quarter, probably somewhere in the vicinity of a 25, 30-page Word document on those strategic insights. And we usually pick 2 or 3 topics. And by the way, the Avanta team does this. I don't approve anything. They pick which trends they want to highlight.
I think this is a golden nugget, which is publish your learnings, your insights internally, especially when it's highly relevant. You're going to get a lot of engagements, responses, goodwill. And so you do it once a quarter, which I mean, it takes discipline. One thing you said, which I want to really highlight because I think it's important and it's so often misunderstood by people who are not in corporate venturing, is that it's not from the startup you invest that you learn. Of course, you learn from them, but it's from the hundreds of startups you look into a given space that you actually can aggregate learnings into and distill it. And I think you use a better word than this, but to get to the insights that then you can share.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'm sure there's always learnings from any one startup, but I think for me, I mentioned we started the blockchain work when I was at Citi, and I remember very distinctly, I read a lot, I have to read a lot in this business. And it was before Andreessen wrote Why Bitcoin's going to change the world or whatever. I was like, he's a pretty smart guy, understate. And then I just started like getting these little myself just through my own reading, like these little hits, something's bubbling up. And then I happened to be in Tel Aviv, I don't know, a few months later, visiting with our lab there. And the lab had set up some meetings for me with a couple of universities who were really interested in talking about Bitcoin. And it was all about Bitcoin. I think I don't remember what year, maybe 2014. Nobody was really talking about blockchain yet at the time. But I think that's just me. And I'm not meeting hundreds of startups as an active investor. That is what investors do. They're talking to all these startups. And often a lot of people, in my experience, have a similar idea about a similar opportunity at the same time. So you just get this amazing, like having a probe in the market. And the probe is creating data, but data in and of itself isn't that useful unless you synthesize it into something meaningful, which might just be a hypothesis as opposed to a hard trend at the time. But I think that's a hugely invaluable thing that comes out of the act of having a venture program.
And your board of directors feedback that this is insightful and helps them think. It's interesting that when you were interviewing, they wonder what's the value, and now they really see the value.
Hopefully, yes, but it's hard we're going to deploy capital to get strategic insights. It can be a hard sell, but you got to follow it up with we have a little pyramid of how do you create value from the venture investing activity. And, the real value comes and we now have that. So that helps people appreciate the strategic insights report because we have real examples of portfolio companies that are delivering revenue for us. And
you have the success stories now.
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, one of them is, I mentioned Mobilitas, our commercial arm. We have a last mile delivery insurance product called M-Fleet, Mobilitas Fleet product. And one of our portfolio companies is InShare. It's a MGA, and they are the primary broker and producer of all M-Fleet revenue on behalf of Mobilitas.
I did not know that.
Yes. And they probably produced, I'd say, close to maybe slightly over 10% of all of Mobilitas's revenue last year. To me, that's where it all comes together. You invest in a company, has a vision. Part of our diligence process and discussion at the investment committee for every company we invest in is what's the strategic relevance and potential value that a partnership with this company can bring us and our customers. And in that case, it's been amazingly successful to date. You have to back it up. I think if all we ever did was produce the strategic insights report, maybe the chair of our board wouldn't be making those comments.
Maybe they would become impatient, but I think you just described one of the best examples I've ever heard of companies that you invest in, the outside in, working with an internal startup, which is meant to be inside out, and I'm sure some parts of your business as well.
Yes.
So the chicken and egg, which one would you start with if you could choose?
It's a hard question for me to answer only because I am so passionate about the importance of us having a meaningful business in the emerging mobility ecosystem. It's asked me to pick which of my two children do I love more, Nicola.
You want both. But the fact you've managed to have both and synergies between them, I think is what makes it really beautiful.
And it's pretty exciting, I have to confess. And I will say that a challenge is they're both startups. And so that has its own inherent challenges in this particular set of examples. Mobilitas is very much a startup business internally. And that means like the headcount that is part of that business, they're still leveraging a whole bunch of other resources internally, different shared services, people. We're trying to keep the core team small and scrappy, and we're trying to hire the right best talent as that business scales. And then the same is true for InShare. I mean, they're a startup externally. And so partnering between two startups has its own inherent challenges. So if there was one, it might be easier if one of them was more mature. But
I think you've managed to change my mind, or at least to challenge my opinion on this. My opinion was, so I started the corporate VC of TDK Ventures. Then there was an opportunity to start the incubator inside to be driven by me. And my view was, this is such a different skill set. And when you wake up in the morning, it's a different focus. I felt like it should be a different team. And I was glad to find a team that wanted to drive it, and they are driving it really well. But now I can see also some value to have the teams under the same reporting line to create these synergies that may actually not be necessarily the focus otherwise.
yeah, I think somewhere along the way in my own personal journey, I think maybe this was another insight from HP. When I started at HP, I was primarily doing just the incubation thing. And then there's this guy over there, and he's this one man liaison to the VC startup ecosystem. And it's like, that seems like synergistic. Maybe we should work more closely together. And then there was yet someone else who was overseeing this increasingly large and growing set of equity investments that we had and were kept acquiring. We kept growing because we were acquiring new companies that had their own equity investments, and convinced my boss to pull that all together under corporate ventures to try and extract some synergies. And I think we did a little bit of that, but when you only have one tool in your innovation toolbox, you have a hammer, you're looking for a nail. I personally have arrived at a perspective that it's better to have all the tools there.
You want the full spectrum.
Yeah. And to be perfectly honest, and even in my small division across the different functions, it's easy for anybody to get just focus on what they are doing. So that's part of my role, is to encourage people to talk across the functional lines to see if we can improve the outcomes.
I want to ask you about where are you on your fund status? And also, where do you see yourself investing in the next year or so that gets you really passionate?
Fund status, we are at the end of our active investing cycle in Fund 1. So coming the 5th year at this point. And I'm happy to say that the board was enthusiastically supportive of Fund 2. So we got approval for that at the end of
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's about 3x the size of Fund 1. And part of that is a strategy to focus on we've been investing primarily Series A, early Series B. We wanted the ability to write slightly larger checks, invest in slightly more mature Series B companies to accelerate our ability to partner with them commercially. What am I excited about investing in? I get excited about a lot of different investments. I'm really excited about right now embedded insurance, and actually investments that might be outside of insurance, but that are strategic adjacencies that will allow us to partner, like maybe different opportunities for distribution, embedded insurance. I think
I have to stop you. I don't know what embedded insurance means.
so. If you think about how insurance works today, you buy a new car. It's hard to buy a new car right now, or a used car, and you have to separately acquire your insurance.
I see.
In the future, does your insurance just come automatically as part of the car, or anything that you might buy that you insure? That could be true of. Again, it's a business model thing. I'm always interested in the business model.
Very nice. Debbie, it was really nice having you today. I think your passion is obvious and your insights are many. So thank you so much. And hopefully the audience learned as much as I did. It was fantastic.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.